interesting phenomena and information, I guess, in our scripture reading today. And so often we've heard this gospel, and the obvious message is very clear. That for someone who is rich, it's very difficult to enter into heaven. And on the surface, the message is clear. If you are in possession of much wealth, it's going to be tough for you. And I think it's too easy, really, to leave it at that. And it's too easy, perhaps, to become judgmental of somebody who is wealthy. Because that's not what this is all about. We sometimes overlook one of the key phrases in this. And it says, Jesus looked at him with love. Jesus looks at all of us with love, with much love and much affection. And when Jesus says how difficult it is for those who have wealth to enter into heaven, and then it says, for human beings it is impossible, but not for God. There is our connection. I think if we look at that aspect of this gospel, it hopefully becomes a little clearer. The man in question had much material to give, much wealth in terms of material things. That was his gift. And Jesus says you need to share your gifts. And he can't do that. He can't bring himself to give his gifts away, his gift of wealth. And if we take that concept and put it or apply it to all of our lives, all of us, not just you, but myself included, what are our gifts? And do we give them to those around us? It's not just material things. In this case, it's material things because it's easier to understand what happens when we think of it that way. You know, when our church first formed, when Father had left and we were in a state of flux, when our church first formed, I looked around. I thought, what can I offer this community? I can't play music. Certainly can't sing. No good at organizing food and coffee and those things. No artistic talent whatsoever. Not very good at setting up an altar. Don't have the imagination to do that. And the next conclusion is that, well, you're a loser, you can't offer anything. But at that time we were kind of struggling for somebody to come up to the front and lead. I thought, well, I can do that. I have the confidence to stand up in front of people and speak. So God gave me this gift. Now it's time for me to share it. And as some of my colleagues present today would tell you, if you can stand up in a room full of teenagers and speak, you can stand up in a room full of adults and speak. And so, from that, of course, things began to unfold, and here I am today. And I use that example to help explain the gospel in the sense that when we look around us and we say, what gifts do I have to give? Or am I like the rich man who says, I can't do that. I can't give away everything I have. When I see our community and I look at what people do, I see a great sharing of those gifts. And I often hear people say to me, wow, you know, you really do an important job here. But if you stop and think about it, just for a moment, and that's why I began using myself as an example. From the time you enter the doors, you're greeted with a warm smile and a hug, and sometimes a joke. Even if it's by a Scotsman, it still counts. And when you get into the room, there are lots of people here to say hello, and so many people who have visited us come in and they, wow, this place is a beehive of activity. It's not a silent little cocoon where you almost crawl in and you hide in a seat. It's not like that. It's a beehive of activity. People are laughing and hugging and joyful. And people are setting up chairs and setting up the altar. I mean, look at the altar. This is beautiful. It's us. It represents who we are. Right? And at each stage of our service, people contribute something. And I say to every one of you, when you come to me and say, wow, that's, blah, 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 what a great homily, or hear that once in a while too. It's a combination of everything. Because we can't do the service without the altar. I'd be up here juggling books and it wouldn't work, right? It'd be a disaster. We struggled this morning to get the microphone that would work to convey the sound to you. I don't know the first thing about that. But it looks like you can hear me because you're all looking up here. That's good. So you see, every aspect of our service has some contribution. And that's just the service that we do on Sunday. We do, I go on and list the stuff, and you know many things that we did. But that's what the gospel is telling us. And so don't be too caught up in the words that strike you at first. Say, oh my goodness, I can't get to heaven because I have too much material stuff. I have too much material stuff. And so I have to be better at discarding some of those things. I know that. And so I work towards that, and I know many of you do too. But that's a very surface thing. What the key is taking the gifts that God gave you, because look what it says, for human beings it is impossible, but not for God. So God gave you these talents to share. And so in sharing your talents, you're making it possible. All things are possible with God. So it's a really beautiful closing phrase. And I guess, as I said at the beginning, I think sometimes it gets lost there in terms of rich and wealth, and we think in those terms in the Western world. You ever ask yourself, how would this gospel be received by Sister Raphael's kids in Kenya? What do you think they'd say when they heard this? First of all, they can't fathom having all these material things at their disposal. They have nothing. They have to walk, some of them, a 10-mile return trip to get water. You just turn on a tap. So when they're told, give away what you have, that's a piece of cake. Done. Done in a second. So, for human beings it is impossible, but not for God. In a lot of respects, they are in a position of superiority to us, aren't they? Because they are the ones that Jesus worked with and looked at and welcomed into his open arms. And it's, as I thought this week, I pictured those kids hearing that gospel and just trying to think of the terms in which they describe it and how they would see it. And it's not meant to make anyone feel guilty, by the way, if you have material things. It's, we could go on philosophically about why we accumulate wealth and all of those kinds of things. I'm a baby boomer. We grew up in a generation where, you know, get everything you can. I remember my dad saying, I want you to have a better life than me, because he grew up in the Great Depression. Many of you can identify with that. So that meant having stuff. And so all your life you have stuff, and then all of a sudden you say, I got too much stuff. And you look at the gospel and say, whoa, way too much stuff. So I got to get rid of this stuff. Yeah, nice words to say, but it's tough to do, isn't it? Two people shaking their heads, yeah, that's great. That is good. Because we know that when we look at this, we say, yeah, you know, I've got to. And when you clear the stuff out of the way, your life is like this altar. This altar, it's plain and yet very beautiful. And that's because of our gifts. Clear out all the stuff and say, okay, I have gifts. I want to share these gifts. And so we begin to do that. And when we do that, that's when we connect with God. That's the beauty. One of the things that may not be a gift is the pastor talks too much. So let us now stand and profess our faith.